Good afternoon and welcome to our self-built hour. My name is Iga and I'm an architect and a passive house designer specializing in design of low energy homes for self-builders. And I am stepping up today for Jenny, who's generally hosting those sessions to fill in for her, as she will be doing the presentation today on the fundamentals of the low energy homes, fundamentals of assembling of your project team. So just to give you an overview of today's topic, at ACA Architects, we know you want your self-build to basically run as smoothly as possible from start to finish. And in order to do that, you need to obtain the relevant knowledge and surround yourself with the right team. The problem, of course, may be that you just don't know where to start, which can make you feel a little bit overwhelmed by the entire process. So at ACA, we believe that everyone should feel empowered to build their dream home. And we also understand that most self-builders may have a limited design, construction and project management experience. And this is why we put this presentation together for you on fundamentals of assembling your project team. So the main take-ons and learning points you will get from today's session is: when is the right time to engage your design team? What does the design and construction process look like? And how do I select the right team for your project? So just a couple of points of logistics of today's session. Just as a reminder, these sessions are live and you can ask questions during those sessions. So this is the main point why we're doing it. So you can type your questions in. For those of you who have not used Microsoft Teams, what you need to do, you need to click a little icon at the top, which's got a little cloud with a chat below it. And then there's the next one with a Q&A below. So if you click them, you will be able to type the questions on your right-hand side. Please feel free to type questions during the sessions. We will have a formal Q&A in the end of it, which will be around 10 minutes. But please feel free to type your questions earlier on. So just to give you an idea where we broadcasting today from, so we are joining you from both of our offices, our head office in Dunfermline in Scotland, and our second office in Swindon down south. So as I mentioned, Jenny, our lovely host, but also a very talented architect, who typically hosts the self-built hour, will be presenting today, and she's based in the National Self-Built and Renovation Centre in Swindon, and from there she assists and educates self-builders on the particulars of the unique process of developing the low-energy projects. So again, today she will join us to explain the fundamentals of assembling your design team. And without further introduction, Jenny, over to you.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, Iga. It's fun to be on this side of the camera, or this side of the presentation again. This is probably more what I'm comfortable with in my, given all the presentations that we give at the center, and as much as we are able to be here, we're fortunate position to be able to be here and answer questions for self-builders live and in person. So it's a real pleasure to also be here today. And what I'm going to do is really just give an overview on sort of the fundamentals of assembling your project team. So as Iga went over, we are based here in Swindon as well as up in Dunfermline. We cover the whole of the UK, and we've completed quite a few self-build projects, from sort of new build projects to extensions to custom build sites. And I get a lot of questions when I'm at the center about where to start, how to assemble the design team, and who it is who should be on the design team. So I'm going to go over that on a very high level view. We could almost break down a lot of the topics that I'm going to touch on today into a full self-build hour. So do encourage you to ask questions during the session. So first of all, we need to make sure that we have a plot before we get started. And there are a lot of people who will come up to me and say, you know, I'm ready to start my project. I know exactly how I want my house to flow, function, look. I've got it sketched out. Can we get started? And the short answer to that is no, not yet. We need to get a plot of land first. We need to know where you're going to be developing this project. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One of the very simple reasons is you're just understanding sort of whether there is planning likelihood for developing in that particular location. Another is because we need to understand sort of what the particulars are of that location. So, you know, we never should be designing sort of in a vacuum. Everything should be considerate of the site location. But for a lot of us, finding the plot of land is one of the most challenging components of that. So, as I said, we could do a deep dive into that, and we will do a deep dive into that. But if you can narrow your search on the location, this is going to help you move through the project quite a bit more seamlessly. You won't be searching through the entire UK. You'll be searching through a much smaller radius, which is then going to allow you to reach out to people, have feelers out. So it's not just you doing the search. Actually, you know, a local estate agent could be helping, or the people at within the village could be assisting you. So you know, start to think about narrowing that site in order to find the plot, and don't be too hung up in finding the perfect plot, because it probably doesn't exist. There are going to be positives and negatives for everything. So you know, start to form your brief and understand what are your must-haves versus what are the things you'd like to have. Doing what you're doing right now is a great place to start as well, educating yourself. So there's a lot that can be done before you have that plot of land. Understanding what your project affordability is. We've had Tom McSherry talk about that quite a bit in an earlier session. Understanding what your key motivators are. Why are you doing this? What do you want your project brief to look like? And doing those sketches is a really important step, because it gives us an understanding of how you use a space. So that's not a wasted effort by any means. It's a really good thing to be doing, and it's something that you'll be including in your brief. Understanding the land suitability. So you'll probably find a lot of different plots of land that could be potentials for you, but understanding whether, you know, what the restrictions might be and what the opportunities might be. Understanding your role. So you'll realize as a self-builder, you have a huge opportunity to decide how much of the project you'd like to take on versus how much you're not really interested or suited in taking on. And so are you going to be, you know, a really involved self-builder, or are you going to do more of a turnkey project? And really understanding what you don't know. So the more research you do, the more you'll understand what are the next set of questions that you need to be asking. So to start off with, relative to your project team, you need to know who you need to work with. So at a very basic level, it's going to be the architect and the structural engineer. And then, you know, depending on the particulars of your project, you may need additional specialists. In my list of might needs, someone is going to be fulfilling those roles to some extent. So if you don't have a standalone planning consultant, your architect will probably be doing a lot of the planning research on your behalf. If you don't have a QS project manager, that's probably because you've decided to take on that role, or you've handed it over to a builder who you're going to be using in some way. Passive house designer and certifier. This really depends how far down the low energy path you are planning on going. Are you going for full passive house design, or are you going better than building regs? And this has a huge impact on the early design stages of your project, the total cost of your project, and the structure of your project. Are you going to need a heating engineer, landscape, lighting, interior designers? A lot of these functions, as a self-builder, you may be piecing together that information or working with different tradespeople in order to get the information you need. And finally, I have on here principal designer. This is a role, once again, that you could take on as the self-builder, but most of our clients, the majority of self-builders, will decide to pass that risk on to the architect. I'll talk a bit more about CDM and principal designers in the later part of this talk. So generally, the design process, it's starting with you. This is your project. So take ownership of it. And even if you don't have the land yet, you can start imagining what are the things you need in the project. You can create that brief, and that brief can be, you know, a list. It can be a series of images. It can be a series of sketches, but it is going to set out the requirements that are important to you as a self-builder. You want to make sure you have this before you engage with the design team, and share that with them when you're getting proposals from potential design team members. And remember that this is a document that's going to change. As I said, a big part of the self-build process is educating yourself. So in that educational process, you'll also be ensuring that you're updating your document and updating your understanding of what your project is. So what to include in your brief? The why for me is the most important, because in a lot of ways, it's the easiest thing to lose sight of. There are a lot of decisions you're going to make throughout the self-build process. So if when you're creating your brief as a written brief, you can sort of handwrite up at the top in big bold letters, what are the most important components of this project? Why are you doing this? And make sure that is really communicated in a strong way to your entire design team, so that everyone is ensuring that they keep track of that through that. And then there's, you know, the very basics of what's a brief. What rooms do you need? What are your sizes that you need? You know, your ideal size for a kitchen may be completely different from my ideal size. So the more information you can give me about, you know, what works, what doesn't work, is really helpful. The flow of the building, we'll ask questions about how you use the building. You know, what are your typical routine in the morning? You know, in terms of, you know, getting up and going and having a, you know, cup of tea and sitting out on a balcony or reading the paper or watching the news, and how you flow and progress through the day is important to how your house flows, and you want that to be supported. Architectural style. So I'm not the one who has to drive up to the house at the end of the day. You are. So the house should fit your needs and give you that warm feeling when you drive up at the end of the day that this really is your house and it really was something that was commissioned by you for you. Understanding views, orientations, energy performance is really important. There are a lot of early design decisions that can have an effect on the overall performance of your building from that standpoint. Once again, what role are you going to be? Are you really involved self-builder? Are you taking on some of the project management roles? Are you turning it over to a builder in order to develop it as a full turnkey? Budget and timescales. You know, there's always sort of that balance between how quickly you can get things done and what your overall budget is. And those push and pull on one another. And we always want to make sure that your expectations of budget and timescales align to the rest of the elements of your brief. So what additional information can you provide with us? Sketches are really good. You may think you're really rubbish at drawing, but it helps us a huge amount, whether it's a diagram or a floor plan or you know, or something more involved than that. SketchUp models. So SketchUp is a free software that you can download. If you're so inclined, you can go into the software and start playing around with it in 3D. Lego or physical models. Some of us are a bit more hands-on, and we like to do that sort of thing. So this was actually a picture of a Lego model that one of our clients brought into us before we got started with them. And Pinterest boards are fantastic because for those of you who haven't used them, it's basically an online bulletin board, pin board, that you can choose pictures, you can say what you like about them, what you don't like about them. And often you telling us what you don't like is just as important as you telling us what you do like. So we encourage you to sort of create an organized Pinterest board and add notes to it so we understand what it is that you're looking at. Even though you might not have your land yet, that doesn't mean you shouldn't necessarily be engaging with professionals. There's a lot of knowledge you can gain from those conversations. You can speak to them about sort of budget and brief, the total overall scope of your project. If that budget and scope are in alignment, understanding sort of building siting relative to plots that you're considering, and consideration of what types of construction methods you may be interested in. Now, I'm really fortunate to be here in the National Self-Build Center, where we often have discussions and can walk over to stands and talk about systems and different things that can be integrated into a project in real time, and what the benefits may be to your project, or whether they might not benefit your project. And it's any conversations you have are going to help you develop that relationship. This is going to be sort of a long time frame for you to be working with a group of professionals, so you want to make sure that you have a really good relationship. Additionally, we as a practice focusing on low energy builds will always discuss the level of low energy. Most of you as self-builders are going into this because you want a house to flow the way you desire for it to flow, for it to look the way you want it to look. But there's always, or not always, but probably 90% of the people who I speak to, energy performance is really important. They don't want to feel cold in the house. They don't want their electricity bills to be, through the roof. So we really advocate for, at minimum, starting with a fabric first approach and then potentially going all the way to passive house. But a lot of these performance goals can be met in early design decisions, a consideration of solar gain, a consideration of what construction type is the appropriate type that you'll get the most benefit of a high level of air tightness, limited amount of cold bridging, and then from there you can start to think about what ventilation and heating systems are appropriate for the level of low energy you're incorporating. So in general, when we are going through a design process, we go through that process in stages. Many of you may be familiar with the RIBA stages of work. This is, the similar sort of approach. We've modified our stages somewhat. They're still in line with RIBA, but we've modified sort of the overall set of deliverables to be better suited to self-builders. So the two initial design stages really focus on the planning and the concept. So initial design and planning application. Once we then have our planning permission, we can move forward into the more technical design stages, which are building regs, building warrant if you're in Scotland, and a set of production drawings that you can go out and build from. Then when we finish all those design stages, we're on site and we provide on-site on-site assistance, and additionally we could provide a full contract administration role. So those are the typical stages that you're looking for from any architect who you're looking at. And then overarching across all those design stages is going to be CDM requirements. So what to look for in the initial design and planning stages. So you always want to be getting design ideas. So we encourage you to go to your architect with a really detailed brief, understanding what the requirements are, but not necessarily locked into the exact design. You're going to get the most benefit from working with an architect if you come to them with a more loose set of parameters where design variations are possible. So what we like to do is take the design brief and develop 2 design layout options for you to consider. They both will fulfill the brief. One of them may be based on a set of sketches that you've provided with us, and one is a completely different approach, because all of us have this tendency to get our blinders on, to start in the design process, but then think there's only one solution. And actually, there's a huge number of solutions to every single problem. So we like to start by highlighting what 2 options could be. And from there, we get responses really quickly. If you've not come to us with a design sketch, we sort of use that as a process of getting inside your head and really picking apart your brief in a lot more detail. And those 2 design options actually may be completely wrong. But finally, at that point, you've got something physical you can respond to, or on paper you can respond to. So now you can say, oh, what I don't like about this is XYZ. And from there, we could usually move into a preferred design scheme pretty quickly, because we've vetted everything. And it's usually not one or the other. It's usually a combination and or something new. But those initial design variations will be based on your brief to achieve your brief. We look at those very quickly in 3D. We know that most people, most self-builders, are not going to be accustomed to looking at a 2D set of drawings. So we do try and move into 3D as quickly as possible. You're going to be wanting to consider structural design and other systems. So there's room for those things in your initial designs. Where you can, we always encourage designing with a construction method in mind. This is going to make everything more efficient. You may not know who's providing that construction system, but if we know what construction system it is, we can design to the efficiency of that system. We'll be putting together a full set of initial design drawings and all the way up to planning level when we get to the end of stages 2, completing external rendered images, really high quality photographic quality images, and then completing all of the supporting document required for the planning application, liaising with the planners. And hopefully 8 to 10 weeks later, we've got our planning and we can move into the more technical design stages. At this point, we should have a really efficient design that we are working to. We should have our structural engineers' initial design information and then start to get their detailed design information that's incorporated in. We'll be working to get the SAP assessment, which eventually results in that EPC certificate. So understanding the performance and bringing it all the way through really detailed set of building regulation drawings, specification, submitting that to the building control officer for review, discharging any planning conditions, and getting you geared up to move on to site. Within this, because we work so much with modern construction methods, there's a large set of production drawings from the manufacturer that's associated with that build. So we review those drawings on your behalf to make sure they are fully coordinated with the different systems that are going to be going into your project. And then finally, we're on site. So at this point, we have some clients who require and request a full construction administration package. And likewise, we have some who are going to be fulfilling that role very much and be involved in the day-to-day project management of their project. But where we should be starting is with a confirmation that we've released all of the planning and building control conditions so that we know our conditional approvals for those things is moving forward as anticipated. We would recommend that you have your architect out at a minimum for key site inspections and toolbox talks, and then just to sort of assist you with those with the overall quality assurance throughout the construction. I mentioned CDM 2015 and principal designers. So you as the client can fulfill these roles. However, we as the architects have EI coverage. We're regularly dealing with these processes, so we have the experience to know what really is required for these regulations and for compliance. So typically, we will fulfill that role of principal designer, and then that role will be sort of handed over to whoever is acting as the principal contractor. Once again, that is a role that you can fulfill, but just make sure that you are very aware of what these CDM regulations are and how you fulfill those as either a principal designer or a principal contractor or both. So throughout these stages, it's really, really important to keep that communication open with everyone and keep the ownership of the project. It really is your project. You are commissioning it. So you are hiring your team of design professionals, and they are there to give you expert advice, but they're also there to help you fulfill your brief in the best way possible. And make sure at every stage that you check that you can afford it. So we'll be starting by considering the cost per square meter. And then as we get further along, we can start to get quotes for some of the big pieces, like the kit construction, the windows and doors, some of the systems that are going to go in. So you can start to refine that. And the further you go along, the better idea you'll have pricing from different consultants or subcontractors that you're using. If you are using a QS, you can get this done at different stages. The further along the project, the more precise that pricing is going to be, and the closer, therefore, the smaller your contingency can get. Make sure you love the design. There are too many people who I talk to at the center who say, oh, well, we got this far in the project and we got through planning, but actually the project that we have planning for is just not the project that I want. It's too big, or it's not the design style I like, or it's not quite the flow that I want, but we got sort of wrapped up in the process and it just kept snowballing down. Make sure you set those times for yourself to sort of step back from the project and make sure that it's going as you would like. And just keep the communication open. Whether you're unsure about something on the project, you don't understand something, ask questions. We know that this is more than likely the first time, maybe even the last time that you're doing a self-build project. So we want to make sure that you understand the process as well as us. So how do you go about getting the right team? First of all, just do a search on people's websites, professionals' websites, to look at their portfolio. See if there are commonalities with what you are trying to achieve. What kind of experience do these professionals have? Do they have experience on low energy design? Do they have experience with self-builder? Do they have experience with modern construction methods? If you're going for passive house, make sure you've got a passive house designer on board. And do they have the ability to listen? So earlier in the talk, I was talking about the importance of early engagement with potential design professionals. And architects get a really bad rap for not being able to listen. So let's make sure that you're comfortable with your architect and your design team's ability to hear what it is that you're hoping to achieve from this project and what your goals are within this project. Also, another thing that can be vetted usually within those first few getting to know each other conversations is the amount of chemistry and trust. Do you trust what your professionals are telling you, the advice they're giving? Because you're going to be relying a lot on their advice. You're probably going to be going out and doing research on your own, and you may find conflicting sources of research. So to be able to come back to your professional and say, these are the things I'm hearing, reading, seeing, what are your thoughts? Ability to visualize. I mentioned earlier that we jump into 3D quite quickly because it helps our clients understand how to visualize, rather than looking at this 2D set of drawings. Most of us, are pretty reasonable at looking around a set of floor plans. But then when you start to look at building sections and building elevations, that's not really the way we ever experience our houses in our world. So to be able to see it in 3D is really important. Additionally, we'll put things into VR for our clients so that you put the headset on, and that gives you a much better sense of the space that's being created, the materiality, and even it's really accurate in terms of the daylighting that you're going to get during different times of year, during different times of the day, during different seasons. So when you're going out and looking for professionals, make sure you're asking for references. Make sure you're having that detailed brief with you to talk to your potential professionals on your design team. Get written quotes so that you always have something to go back and reference, and you can compare and contrast the quotations and proposals you're getting. We always recommend really, really strongly that you're going for fixed fees. There are still a lot of architects and design professionals that work on a percentage of construction cost. This is variable. So you as a self-builder need to be really sure of what your budget is from the outset. So the more assurance you can get on that, and a practice that has experience with your type of project will be able to get information from you in terms of the brief and the scale and time, the time scales and the budget. Will be able to put together a fixed fee proposal that's based on the number of hours in their experience it will take. This is you, as I said before, you want to make sure that you're working with someone who understands your type of project and goal project. We also put together our fee proposals in a way that it's broken down stage by stage. So you're only ever instructing for one stage of works. So that if something happens with your project along the way, it stalls, your circumstances change, this isn't a problem. You can you get through that stage, and then the project goes on hold. And if it needs to be picked up again later, it can be. Likewise, if it's the end of the project or it's moving on to a different set of professionals, that cut is clean. So that is everything that I want to share today. So I'm going to hand it back over to Iga and open it up to questions now.
Hi, everyone. Hi again. Thank you, Jenny. That was a great overview of the very kind of complex process that can appear as a complex process within the half an hour. So there was a lot of knowledge there to be passed to our viewers. And we're going to move on now to the questions. So if you haven't posted anything yet, please do feel free to post us the questions. And I actually got one from myself to start us up. I really enjoyed your presentation regarding the developing the client's brief. And just in relation to the budget, how realistic the self-builder needs to be when creating that brief?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and one we talk about at the beginning of the project, midway through the project, throughout the project, various stages, because things can change during the project in terms of your expectations as the client or getting excited about things. But our starting point is really to say, what are your requirements for a house, and understand how that translates into gross square meters and what the typical construction costs are for those square meters. So if you came to me and said, well, I'd like a 4-bedroom house with open plan living, a study, and my construction budget is $400,000. What you don't know is probably what a house of that size typically is in terms of square meterage. But I can come back to you, and an architect can come back to you and say, well, if you want a 4-bedroom house with those sorts of specs, you are probably going to be, in the range of 225, 250 square meters. However, with £400,000 construction budget, you're looking at sort of minimum cost of 2,000 square meter, and that's if you are doing all of that. You're really heavily involved in that build process. So that brings us down to 200 square meters, and we may say, you know what, that's not quite big enough for what we're trying to develop. We're going to end up with box bedrooms. So let's really talk about it, see if there's flexibility in that brief. Can an office and the 4th bedroom be combined? Are there ways to be more efficient about that build and more efficient with that budget? But that's sort of from a gross standpoint. As the project goes along, things often get added in and pushed in, pulled in. You want to try and get more out of it. When we talk about costs and gross per square footage, that 2,000 is really sort of the bare bones mark. You're doing a lot in that 2,000 square meters. Most self-builders, even if they are taking on quite a lot, are in the 2,250 to 2,500. And then if you're going more turnkey, you're going to be up at around 3,500 plus per square meter. And that's going to get you moved into the house, ready to go. It's going to have a reasonable level of finishes, not super high end, but also not base. It's going to give you, £10,000 towards a kitchen, £5,000 towards a reasonable number of bathrooms per bathroom. But if you are a person who spends a huge amount of time in the kitchen and that's really important to you and that's your main entertaining space, then you may say £10,000 for a kitchen is not enough. So, make sure you're adding that in. But as I said, you've got the flexibility as a self-builder to say, you know what, I want to get more for my money. So maybe I'm going to take on more of that self-build process in order to get those costs right down.
That's a really great point. Of some of the viewers may be potentially shocked with the figures we are coming up in here, but these are rule of thumb figures. We don't know at the beginning of the process potentially what's in the ground, how that brief's going to develop. But the reality is that there's a broad figure, there's a rule of thumb figure that you can be you're in charge of. In what you required your architect to be designing. So there's an element of the brief constraint. Your architect can guide you of how to make savings, how to make that design as efficient as you can within that budget. And also there's stuff that you can do as a self-builder. You can actually educate yourself to do some of the parts of the process yourself. So for instance, managing different contractors on site, taking on that project management role, that's going to take quite a bit of, the final pricing, what that, construction cost is going to come up at. And again, what you need to be aware of course, is do you actually have time and skills to do it? But if you do have time, you can learn how to do it potentially. And again, doing, your works on site, so potentially actually training yourself on parts of the build you can do physically yourself. So like airtight tapes, put it up on a timber frame. This is a really time-consuming exercise, but it's something that anyone can do once trained. And there are a number of courses all over the UK you can attend and basically train yourself again, bring that budget down. But the key point, I guess, from the question was that when it comes to brief, you want to be as realistic as possible to what that budget you have set up can get you, and listen to your architect when they try to tell you, some things are, may not be as feasible as you may think. But I guess also to sum this up, you should enjoy the process. It's going to be your dream home. You potentially doing it once in your lifetime, so the process should be enjoyable as well as within the budget. Okay, so we've got another question that kind of falls into that. Who do I appoint? Actually, I've got another question from the viewer, which asks, can any house design be a passive house, certified passive house? So this is an interesting question. So an answer to that is potentially yes, but it will depend on what that design is. So if you opt for a quite elaborate design with different shapes, different roof shapes, and quite spread out form, it's slightly more difficult to get you to that passive house criteria, which are quite onerous to meet them and to meet that certification criteria. It's not impossible, it just means it may be more expensive. You're going to have to insulate the building to the higher kind of depths, and it's maybe that you're just gonna miss that certification level because potentially site constraints as well, the location, the positioning of the house is not entirely lending itself to the to meet those passive house criteria as smoothly as you would want to. However, the Passive House Institute has actually recently, catered for those houses that those designs that don't quite meet the passive house criteria by creating a passive house low energy homes, which basically means, if you don't meet the stringent criteria, there is still an opportunity there. You can still get your certificate. You can still build to those very good performing criteria in terms of the low energy and so on. So I've got another one for you, Jenny, is the question, who do I appoint first, and when would that be within the process?
Of course. So as I mentioned in my slides, you can start that engagement quite early before you have land. It gives you opportunities to build those relationships. It also gives you opportunities to ask questions about potential sites and the site's suitability. But really, you're going to be engaging with, once you have the land, you'll be going and asking for proposals before appointing a professional. So you have the land, you have your brief, you have your budget, all sort of figured out. Then you start going and talking to architects and getting proposals from them. And your architect is typically the first person you're going to appoint. There are some cases where it's a really difficult planning situation. So you may have actually gone through the project via the planning consultant first, or it may be a case of having a planning consultant and an architect on board from the get-go. But if you start to talk to professionals, either planning consultants or architects, they'll give you an idea of who and when needs to be appointed at that time. And it may be worthwhile to talk to an architect because they can give you a good sense of, this is something I regularly work with in terms of planning, or let's get someone involved who has a lot of really policy driven experience. Shortly after that, you're going to need a structural engineer. We really like, as architects, working with structural engineers from early in the design process, because they can do a desktop study of the site suitability in terms of the soil components and mining, flooding, anything that may affect the feasibility of your project from a structural standpoint that we may not be fully aware of. And so it helps influence the design and put us in a better position to give you a design that is constructible from really early design stages. The other thing that they can do is once we start to work up those initial designs, they can do a really sort of overview set of overmarks to give us basic ideas of where major structural components need to be before they even get into the calculations. And what that does for us is it allows them to say, if this wall was slightly aligned, better aligned to another wall, or if your window shifted over 200 millimeters, that's something that can really influence your planning. And if it is a much more efficient solution, it may make little difference to the design and to the feel of the building, but it does make a difference to your planning permission. So if we get that information before we go to planning and get it sort of set, basics set structurally, then we have less that potentially we need to go back and get non-material amendments.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point on the structural and engineering in particular, because traditionally on the projects, you would what's an industry norm is you don't engage with the structural engineer until later stages of the process, which you don't want that. You want to be proactive because of the reasons that Jenny has outlined, but also that initial overmark will help you with that budgeting. We were talking about the briefing, because once you have that engineering overmark, then your costing that can be done at those initial design stages will be much firmer than if you wait for that engineering to come through later on. So the costing that the kit companies will give you if you don't have engineering will be always subject to the engineering overmark. And that can be adding between 20 to 100 grand easily, depending on a design. So be mindful of that, I guess. And, it's a really good point on getting an engagement with a structural engineer as early as possible. And just to summarize that, when do you appoint and who do you appoint first as well, is quite often, you may find a piece of land, and Jenny mentioned that on the beginning of her answer, that you may find a piece of land and you not necessarily need to actually engage with the architect for a full architectural services, but what they would be able to bring to the table is they can assess that land with you to see whether it's suitable for the design you wish to build for, whether it's a passive house design or whether it's just, low energy or just a standard design, really, to see whether the plot you're looking at is actually feasible, to be building on the house you are dreaming on. So definitely it's something that you can engage with the architect straight away. You don't have to commit to the full architectural service. And so some of the architects would provide you with potential free of charge service. And I think that's what we do in ACA as well. If you contact us, we will be able to review the plot and give you some high level tips on it. So as soon as you can, I guess. And the same, I think it comes when it comes to the extensions. I don't know whether we have any viewers today that are looking to build an extension, but quite often, as architects, we would come along, look at your property, discuss your ideas, and give you some tips of how we would foresee maximizing the potential of your existing home if you're planning to stay there and just extend it. So I just wonder whether we have time for any more questions. I think we have time for one more, Jenny. So there's a question here on the design process itself and how long does the design process take to get you to the plan?
Yeah, sure. So I talked in my presentation about wanting to have someone you could work with because you'll be working with them for a long time, but I didn't say how. So, if we talk about sort of an efficient design process, and by efficiency, I mean, the questions the conversations that we're having and the decisions we need made are made in sort of relatively short time frames, and the time frames for those regulatory processes and reviews are done in the typical time scales. These are the things that make it more efficient. So when we talk about a new build project, it does depend on size, but an average size new build project, you're probably looking at an efficient design process being a total of 9 months. That's going from those initial design stages and planning, and then waiting sort of the 8 to 10 weeks for your planning decisions to come through, and then getting started on technical design and getting a building control officer to review for conditional approval. And half of that, or maybe a little bit more, is the planning through getting the planning decision. So I would say you should plan to allocate for those 2 early design stages about 3 months for the initial design and then submitting to planning. And that, for most projects, that gets us enough time for all the back and forth that are required and decisions made.
So yeah, so that's a great summary, and it just gives you an overview of how long you have to actually allow for. And I'm sure some of you didn't realize, oh my God, it's actually quite a lot of work that we have to go through. But we can also streamline process. It depends on what tools your architects are using to do that. So the key points are like, how do we communicate and how quickly you can get a feedback from yourself on the information we present to you on the initial design, but also what format that presentation takes. So at ACA, we tend to utilize all the tools we can grab our hands on just to help you making those decisions as efficiently as you can. So rather than you sitting down and, pulling your hair over a 2D plan that doesn't make much sense to you in terms of the actual spatial awareness, we will provide you with a 3D model that we can walk you through, but also you can attend a VR session, whether it's in Swindon or in our Dunfermline office, which is a great tool to experience. And it can sound a bit maybe futuristic for some, but it's a great experience, and it does allow you to make much more informed decisions on sizes, on spaces, of where to locate the window when you're actually walking in. I always compare it to buying shoes. Would you buy shoes without trying them? This is what VR does, because you're literally trying the design you've done with your architect in a kind of live format. So yeah, just to recap, I think I'm just being cautious about running over time. I know you're all very busy people, so I am just going to share my main takeaways from Jenny's presentation today, and we're going to wrap this up. So the main points from the presentation to take away today are to develop your brief early on and commit to it. And I'm not going to elaborate on this because we spent quite a lot of time talking about it. Be the best self-builder or client you can be. What does it mean? Learn as much as you can. There's so many free resources. You're already doing it by attending this session. So you already started doing it, which is great. But do as much as you can so you are informed, and it's much easier and smoother process for you, and you actually enjoy the process rather than stressing about it. Prioritize your goals and integrate them from the outset. So Jenny talked, I think, on the beginning in terms of your again project brief of what the goals are for your home, whether it's low energy build, that energy performance that's going to drive it, whether it's a quality. There are different aspects for different people. So that's the prioritizing the goals. And final one, hire the right team to design in more complicated features. So that's my takeaways from today's session. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'm going to pass it over to Jenny to share her last slide.
Well, thank you very much for hosting this week, Iga. It was nice to be on the other side of it this week. But I just wanted to share with you quickly a reminder of the next Self-Build Hour, as well as an upcoming opportunity that we have. So at the National Self-Build Centre in Swindon, we host seminars a few times a year, and we have one coming up on the 26th of April. If you're enjoying sort of the format of this, we have a sort of a similar set of overview of the building process that we put together in a one-day seminar format where we invite other experts from throughout the industry to talk about things like funding your project, structural engineers, project management, heating options, and ventilation options. And this is an opportunity for you to start those early engagement conversations with professionals. And it's also an opportunity for you to network with other self-builders, which can often be a really useful tool for self-builders to have these additional conversations and understand people who are going through it at the same time as you. So at £40 per person, full day with lunch included, it's a really good value for money in terms of getting professionals time and understanding what those next steps are for your project. So and then finally next month we'll be hosting this session again, the second Thursday of the month, 1 o'clock. Next session will be focused on finding land. So Alan Corfield is going to be joining us to talk about this subject. So I talked about it a bit in our slides that you need to have your plot of land before we can really get started in earnest. So for those of you who are struggling to find land or don't know where to start, this is going to be a really good topic for you. So thank you very much for your time and attention this week, and we look forward to seeing you next month.